This is the longest part sa loob ng substance ng Siksi. I'm getting any signal. Akong signal. Okay, I'll just do that yet because it's quite complicated. So you see the pictures during Typhoon Sindong, and it's really, those are really pictures of pain and grief and loss. And this picture, this one and this one, I think were featured in many newspapers as one of the most painful picture that would depict the agony that followed the Typhoon Sindong. And this is all how he responded to the tragedy. And we might summarize that Sindong extinguished more than 2,000 lives and 1,000 more were missing. 3 months before Sindong, a non-government organization called Enterprise Works Worldwide Philippines was working together with the LG of Ligula, conducting some mapping of water resources and users in the slopes of Mount Titanglad as shown in that picture. It might interest you to know that we work in the area which received the highest volume of rainfall during the time in the very area where we conducted the mapping. As you can see in the picture, the one encircled is from where the major source of the floodwaters come from, and these are the height of the floodwaters during the time. It started with something 2 to 4.5 meters up there, but ended up with 7.9 meters when the floodwaters reaches Cagayan de Oro. Okay. So this is actually a graphic presentation made by the OST to show to you that the highest rainfall comes from the uplands, which is 479 something millimeters, and not 181 millimeters as reported by Pag-asa, which is found on the figure encircled in green. That's why I call this misinformation. So the truth of the matter is that there's so much rainfall during Sindong. So as we said, EWWP was working in that area. It's an NGO and a division of Relief International, our host for today. And EWWP during that time was a grantee of the USAID for biodiversity conservation through the Management of Natural Resources project, and a grantee of the European Union on EU's Emerging Champions for Biodiversity Conservation and Improved Ecosystem Services. And this is how our journey begins when it comes to our PS advocacy. After Sindong, we conducted a biophysical assessment of the CDO River Basin. Nandun na kami, pagpatuloy na lang. And we were so horrified, alarmed of what we saw, that we said we shall campaign for the massive rehabilitation of the CDO River Basin. And anyway, this is in furtherance to the objective of the project of broadening opportunities for environmental financing and sustainable enterprise development through the payment for ecosystem services. And our campaign since then involved the following. As mentioned, we conducted ground assessment, mapping, and documentation of the situation of the river basin. After knowing the information, we went into lobbying, hosted roundtable discussions, planning workshops, and event organizing just to let the public know that we are into something very dangerous. And then the next step there would be alliance building. We build partnership because we believe alone we could not tackle the challenge that is ahead of us. And this includes collaboration with NGOs, government agencies, civil societies, and NGOs. Then we continue our work. We provided technical assistance, mentoring and coaching and enhancement and mobilization of our partners, not just our peers in the group, but also the recipient of our intervention. Now, the documentation, let me state very briefly why it was alarming. It's because if you see in the left, it's multicolored. That represents the 8 sub-watersheds that comprise the City of River Basin. The first finding was that one, the left side. Sendong is a rarity. You know, the last time a typhoon crossed the same path was more than 100 years ago. More than 100 years ago. Then the second is that, you know, our river basin is on very hazardous morphology. Imagine the headwaters is straddled by 2 mountain ranges, one of which is the second highest in the country. And from there, you know, water can gather volume and force as it exits towards the city and towards Macalar Bay. Third, if you see in the picture there, encircled by clouds, that is actually our headwaters. And it's colored brown. It means it is barren. So it was raining hard, so hard, it could not hold, it could not absorb the excessive rainfall that fell. The last one, last frame there, shows to you the portion with the red color. It shows that, you know, people in the lowlands don't care about getting out of harm's way. They in fact constructed housing subdivisions along the floodplains, and that's of course equivalent to suicide. And then the last few frames there is that, you know, you have basically grasslands, unsustainable agriculture, and massive soil erosion that is found on the slopes. Now, the ground assessment also discovered that if you have the river basin, 76% of that is cultivated areas and grasslands. 76%. And this area could not hold rainfall. And only 13.6% is closed forest, and 10.4% is open forest cover, which means that when you have an open forest cover, only 10 to 40% are covered in forest, the rest are open. It is aptly, I think, described as open areas. Now, we further our documentation. We wanted to know what is really the condition of the headwaters, and that is the satellite image from Google, which shows that it is colored brown. But to be sure, we work with SOLOC, a coalition of NGOs in Cagayan de Oro City. It was organized after Sendong with the motto, "One Sendong is enough." And we get assistance from the Philippine Air Force and conducted this aerial survey. So look like this, everywhere is grasses. In fact, in the headwaters, more than 50% of the headwaters, totaling 16,000 hectares of grasses, or an ocean of grasses, characterize the headwaters. And this sad story started 6 decades ago, when the government itself allowed 3 logging companies to remove the trees. Government itself authorized, and I don't know what goal, what moved them, maybe money, to allow the harvest of trees in the very area that is supposed to protect the lowland communities from flooding. So, EWWP, RI, did not stop there. We wanted to go further by procuring at an expensive amount, spending an expensive, huge amount of money to procure the latest satellite image. And this is the one on the right. That one on the right represents the rectangular spot there, where we wanted to study what really is the condition of the headwaters. And it looks like this. The headwaters is composed of a mosaic of unsustainable hillside farming and grasslands, and people there move around when the farm lot had run out of nutrients, and they move to the next lot and allow what they left behind to develop organic matter over time. And on the slopes, many of the areas look like this. That is the condition of our headwaters. So, because of that information, we prepared a rehabilitation plan in the hope that this will guide the DNR to focus their targets on these areas, because below, downstream, millions of people depend their lives on the health of the watershed. And so these are the initial groups. Any kind of group, even the presidential assistant for presidential advisor for environment, was involved in this lobbying, including the mayor of Laguna. And there seems to be no taker of the rehabilitation plan. But we have a consolation that our journey, partnering with the partners, with the farmers and IPs at the Mount Calatungan and Kitanglad Range, went further and brought us even to the August Falls of Malacanang. Ganun ka-tindi ang journey namin. No? And this is the saddest part of the story, is that we discovered that 3 months after Sendong, when the Regional Development Council prepared a rehabilitation plan for that areas devastated by Typhoon Sendong, and they come up with a budget of around 15 billion pesos. But to our dismay, that 15 billion pesos focused on agriculture and infrastructure, and only a token was allotted to environment. 15 billion for infrastructure and agriculture, only 97 billion for the repair of the environment. This is a comparison of 99.4% versus only 0.6%, not even 1%. So, the priorities are always on the gray infrastructures. And we are saddened because this is the situation of all the 8 sub-watersheds. That's the forest cover, the open grasslands, which needs to be reforested. And all we wanted was this area, even 50% of that only, would be reforested to provide ample vegetative cover to mitigate or reduce the risk of flooding whenever it rains hard. But there's no money for that, for this purpose. And so sad, because it would need, if 50% of 56,000 is 28,000 hectares at a cost of 100,000 pesos per hectare, that would cost us 2.8 billion, while the total rehabilitation plan was 15 billion plus. Sayang, kasi ganito ang situation. 15 billion versus 97 billion. So nandiyan, dagan man lang para mangganyan. And we are okay. Pero hindi nangyari yan. So, EWWP, RI, lobbied for the support of the rehab of this basin through a funding mechanism called the Payment for Ecosystem Services. So we may ask, what is ecosystem services? Ecosystems are, forests, mangroves, and waterfalls, and floodplains, those things that, maintain the balance of nature, that provides services like water, clean air, biodiversity conservation, etc. So, lobbying for support to the rehab of the river basin through PS mechanism happened because we saw no significant sources of funds to support our campaign for rehabilitation. So we bank on the payment for ecosystem services, which is defined as that those who provide ecosystem services, those who protect the forest or any ecosystem, should get incentive for doing so. While we who benefit from these services, tayong mga lowland population particularly, auto-pay to compensate for the provision of that services. And for our education, just a quick briefer, the elements of the PS transaction, kailangan mayroong seller. The seller could be the owner of the land or agent, or could be a de facto resource manager, a settler, a engineero, or a rights holder like a CADP holder, IP claimant, or those authorized by law like the LGU, the Family Foundation, etc. What it is selling carbon storage and sequestration. You plant trees, it sequesters carbon. It conserves wetlands, like dati ang Katkay, wetland, diba? But we introduce a lot of structures there, so it rains, it gets flooded. If you have a car in the parking area, you look for it in Bacalar Bay the next day. And then soil protection, species and habitat by the city conservation. The buyer of these services could be the public in general, the business sector, it benefits from these services. Corporation, under their corporate social responsibility, CSO, like cooperative, civil groups, the government, research institution, etc. Then, what is the mode of payment? It could be in the form of grants, and it could be investments, it could be cash, it could be local tax revenues, water levy, it could be legal rights or royalties for IPs. It could be a branding or product certification linked to conservation. That's very brief. And so, ito nga, yung journey namin, we went to the IPs, the NCIP director is there at the bottom. Even we went to Bishop Cabantan and to Bishop sa religious sector, the academic, kahit sino. No? Para lang makakatulong sa aming kumpanya. Then, fortunately, the DNR from its central office have initiated a program on PES, which by that time, parang ang preparatory stages nagawa na ng RI-EWWP. And so, what RI did when that project came over was to form a core group. It could have been an informal core group, but these are very effective because these are composed of key officers of government agencies, the DNR, the AGG, MINDA. MINDA played a key role in this. Civil society, which includes again the Oro River Management Council, NGOs, LGOs, DNR, the Biodiversity Management Bureau, and the consultants of the DNR, and the academe. So ito yung core group. Pay attention to this core group kasi ito yung naglakad ng advocacy in partnership with RI-WWP. So the group, this core group, was responsible for putting together the nuts and bolts of the Mount Kalatungan PS project, the first project after Sindong. So, as explained, this project, supported by DNR, is done under the auspices of the National Program Support for Environment and Natural Resources Project, implemented by the DNR Office, Biodiversity Management Bureau, in collaboration with several partners. Some of their logos are found there, even PAFID, of course, Enterprise Works, the Archdiocese of Cagayan de Oro, Xavier University, and so on. So, even before this core group was formed, RI-EWWP was already into engaging upland farmers in the very headwaters into various interventions like this one, that is Dato Reo or Milalitra, who was contracted by EWWP to mass propagate indigenous tree species, seedlings of indigenous species for plantations or reforestation of degraded areas doon sa loob ng kanilang kanti. So, ito nga yung Batang Subwaters at the headwaters. These are activities conducted April 2013 pa even the project of DNR was even introduced into the area. Ibig sabihin, it's actually EWWP which pioneered work with the IPs so that pagdating ng mga bank partners, halos nakalatag ng lahat. Now, this is the area we prepared para i-contract sa Mila Litra under Dato Rio, where we will pay for their efforts in establishing forests and agroforestry in these areas, which form parts of the headwaters. So we prepared, assisted the drafting of the contract. But again, let me show you the headwaters. And it is straddled by Mount Kitangan and Mount Kalatungan. And that area there, which is bounded by black lines, is for agroforestry, and pink one, velvet one, is for reforestation. So this is the perspective that the area, which is the subject of the PS, is found there. And then obviously, if you do something to improve that, that will improve ecosystem services. It will abate flood and minimize disaster risk from flooding, and provide supportive services like water supply. And it will benefit the lowland population, and which comprise the buyers, which are all the stakeholders within or impacted by the CDO River Basin. And when these people downstream will pay the sellers, Mila Litra, you need to have a fund manager, which in this case was performed by the Civil Science Foundation, which will monitor, validate before the Mila Litra gets paid. So that is it. And overall, the Cagayan de Oro River Basin Management Council provide oversight, monitoring, to see to it that the entire transaction is transparent and inclusive. And finally, when things are put together, there was a signing, and which were witnessed by Minda Regional Director, the representatives of the Mila Litra, and the DNR Secretary, Ramon Pae. Mayor Moreno was there, and I shall not forget myself. I am there in the black suit. Madali naman kasi gwapo. Ayun, ini-circulan pa, in case you miss it out. Okay. We, to be modest, maybe not to be modest about it, we believe that this transaction of provider and buyer would not be complete if meron kang provider ng services, wala kang buyer. So it was really EWWP which took the lead to look for buyers. And we were able to convince the following: Maspec, marami, including Shell Philippines. Of course, Minda volunteered to comprise the initial batch of buyers for this transaction. And we were lucky, EWWP was lucky, because the regional director of CDA during the time was Orlando Rabanera, and he's a good friend of mine. So I just twist his arm, and he convinced the CDA cooperatives to take a stake in this transaction. Now, other than that, EWWP and other groups expanded their campaign for PS, and we assisted Libuna to draft their PS ordinance, and it was approved, in fact, noong April of 2015. Pero pagdating sa kay Mayor Bineto niya, sayang, si Belia din, kasama pa yan sa, when we were trying to campaign for this, and everything was discussed, except that there are lacking provisions like penalties for those uncooperative sectors that the mayor said, punuin niyo muna before I approve, but it already has my imprimatur. Ibig sabihin, actually, project ito ni mayor. No? Project ni mayor. Just wanted to make sure that everything is in place. But before the ordinance was passed, Del Monte had already contributed to rehabilitating the gullies in the area, providing seedlings, and the LGU had already paid for residents who joined to plant trees to stabilize the gullies and the waterways in Libuna. And aside from Libuna, there are other areas where PES, if not PES, we call them ecosystem services, like hindi na tinawag PS because the players in the transaction does not agree na PS yun. Even if personally I believe na kompleto Ricardo talaga PS, just for respecting cultural sensitivity, you have to just say it's an ES. It is a model initiated by the Talandig Group in Lantapan in collaboration with Unifruti Philippines, of course with some assistance from Hinelaban and EWWP. And this is all about, it is called the Sacred Customary Compact for Peace and Progress, or Bigalahu Kilalaha, Sayuda Boliga o Yagataw Pabatu-Batu na Habatasa. That's the native term for that. It's a memorandum of mutual recognition, understanding and support, and solitude and cooperation between the 7 tribes of Bukidnon and Unity Group Philippines. The road to this compact was quite, what we call that, unpleasant, because it started with Unifruti going inside the area, starting the operation, and the Talandig, of course, were not amused because they did not secure a FPIC. And the Talandig stood back and do not allow the operation to continue. It was almost a decade before cool heads prevailed, and the head of the Talandig, Dato Diksaway, and the president of Unifruti, John Perrine, talked to each other for 6 hours before they agree, okay, we will harmonize our objectives, we'll harmonize this and that, and we will respect each other traditions and principles. So this is actually the transaction. Why I say it could pass as a payment for ecosystem services transaction, because the 7 tribes, as represented by the Talandig, who call themselves as the custodians of the rainforest and the keepers of the mountains, will protect the watershed and promise to rehabilitate it, to ensure the rivers and the perpetuation of the rainforest, and that what comes out will be irrigation water that will support the plantation of Unifruti in banana and pineapple plantation. And Unifruti is the second party here. And in return, Unifruti pays 1,000 pesos per hectare for every hectare of banana planted, and 500 pesos per hectare for every pineapple plantation planted. And this they call water resource generation share. I would like to call this actually as a royalty payment or an entitlement, because you protect the watershed. And that therefore this becomes a veritable payment for ecosystem services mechanism or transaction. But he said no, it's water resource generations here, and we have to respect it at that. And the first party benefits from this. It's already almost on its 6th, 7th year, and it's working. May mga things that needs to be ironed out, but it's working. Now, other than that, in the neighboring area, neighbor of Bukidnon is the WAO payment for ecosystem services, which actually came earlier. This was initiated by EcoGov, 2007 pa, 2008. It's start ito, and EcoGov is a USAID-funded project. I was with EcoGov then. Part ako I was the Mindanao Forestry Advisor of EcoGov during that period. So, yun, series of discussion then. But you see that this is a voluntary transaction where the WAO Water District promised to contribute 55,000 pesos per year. Unifruti pays 100 pesos per year, contribution in cash and in kind. Even the WAO Truck Owners Association, by using water to clean their vehicle, have to pay 10 pesos per truckload. And the WAO Development Corporation, which is a subsidiary of Unifruti for pineapple plantation, pays another 100,000. Then, also in Northern Mindanao, we have the Naawan Misamis Oriental PS. It was not very controversial, unlike the one we push now for Cagayan de Oro. Why? Because they embedded the payment for ecosystem services provision in the economic code. And nobody really saw the need to contribute some amount to pay for the water you consume every month. Anyway, this is it. It's generating 350,000 per year from 1 peso per cubic meter of potable water provided for watershed and restoration fee. Sandali lang, I think with the help of Minda ang tumulong dito, parang in 3 months time approved. Sa Cagayan de Oro, 50 centavos lang hanggang ngayon, di pa na-approve. Kaya feeling ko, parang, siguro baka gusto nila another sendong, simba ko. Okay, so in summary, this is the status of peace adoption in Northern Mindanao. And WAO, as explained, it is with the help of EcoGov, it's now being implemented. Libuna, it is a draft, but there is partial implementation with the help of EcoCare, CDRMC, WWP, and I forgot to mention there Del Monte Foundation, the beautiful Bell was here. The LACAG, it is already passed, pero hindi na-implement. Ang CDO, it's already on its 18th version, draft version 18. Hindi ba ma-approve? So, lalo na it's now election is nearing. Everybody seems to look at the PS ordinance as a hot potato. They don't want to do anything with it. So maybe it's going to approve after the election. And then Naawan, I already explained. Kalatungan, that's the first one as I explained. Lantapan, the second compact. And Oroquieta, it's already enacted but not implemented. So also being done with USAID support. Now, just to show you that EWWP, after PS, continues to provide assistance through training, mapping, and here, this was done in Libuna. And so I'd like to thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions?
Clear as mud.
Yes.
Thank you, Raul. That was really interesting. So you presented various examples of a PES agreement, some of them between Unifruti and Xavier University, and then the LGUs, and then Relief International was working in there as well. What advice would you give to other businesses that are here today on how they could set up something similar with IP tribes and government and also civil society moving forward, so we can do more of these? What advice would you give?
On the side of the particular business, now today I think you've heard of attacks on NPA, problems on peace and order, and almost there was no exemption. Just 4 days ago, the boom truck of Dole was burned. And so you need to buy peace in the area. And one of it, which is mutually beneficial to your audience and the company itself, is help in the securing the health of the ecosystem that provides you the services to sustain your business. So we don't want business to look at this simply as a corporate social responsibility that is part of your medical mission. This should be taken as a serious obligation of the corporation, of the business sector, to really make development inclusive in the area and not just for itself. So I think that's from the perspective of business. But for those who are here working with IPs, we really need champions. This transaction did not happen if there is no fierce champion that brought the interest of the IPs towards its positive fruition. So in the case of that of Vicsaway, because I've heard a while ago that you have a dato in the area, then he gets paid, and suddenly the interest are diluted in the process. And this commonly happens, particularly dito sa Surigao, no, when the IP rights over mining royalties, no, are forgotten, no, in the course of the transaction, because there is no champion who is transparent and dependable.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Betty Francia from PBJA, that's Filipino Banana Growers and Exporters Association. Your presentation is good. Now we have seen the birth of Hinelaban. We have tasted their coffee because they used to give us also. It was really that nice. No? Since years the inception, because we know Mr. John Perrine, we know Ed Poliser and all. And we used to go to that area also in Tantapan. But in fact, last year, April, we did our medical mission in somewhere, ano yun? Bantuanon. Yeah, we were there, no? We give our medical mission. For our part, in the banana industry, we just don't go to a place where we had plantations. We had our mission also of going out, even with areas where we don't have plantations. Because people would always tell us that we are just taking care of the place or the community where we are there. But that's a wrong insinuation. Because we also work with people in Talaingod. In Talaingod, we have given classroom buildings. We go there not even on Christmas, but during their Brigada Eskwela and opening of classes wherein we give supplies to the children, to the IPs talaga. Wherein, minsan nga hindi kami magkaintindihan because they don't speak our dialect, kahit na Bisaya kami, iba din yung ano nila. You know what Talaingod is in Davao del Norte? But I'm just trying to let them know that Talaingod is really a place wherein, kumbaga takot yung iba pumunta. It's because of the peace and order situation. But we used to go to places like that. And one thing I have noticed in your presentation, there's the banana, there's the pineapple, using the water, but we haven't seen sugar cane and corn. Yun yung ano namin question, sir. Why is there a selective product for that? Because they also use water, di ba? So yun lang ho ang observation ko. Why is it there's no sugar cane when we know that Bukidnon is a sugar cane area before we came in? Yun lang po. Thank you.
Thank you. That concern was raised to me also by an international group called Fair Foods. Pineapple lang sa banana. When considerable area is cultivated with sugarcane field and corn that put together, baka sobra pa sa area occupied by banana. So I think the honest answer is that ang project time frame ng EWWP was one, limited, and the second, the area of convenience so far as partners are concerned. Ayun lang, yung tawag na the low-hanging fruit para sa amin, yung banana at saka pineapple. Why not? But given enough resources and time, we could have had extended even to other crops. Because as early as we implement this project, that issue was already raised. And I agree with you.
Sir?
Yes, Grace?
Yeah. Pero siguro, sir, my understanding is that why you highlighted the pineapple, is it because your areas would be around Kitanglad, right? So there would be a lot of pineapples there, and of course recently bananas, but not much with sugar cane because we know it's in Quezon, Bukidnon. So you go.
Proximity.
Yes.
Wala ang sugar. Wala.
Hapon po.
Actually, getting payment for environment. Hello. Kaning payment for environment services na discuss na muni sa office sa nakatok sa Ecosytem Foundation pa ko. Kasi gwapo ang program. Pero kami magud po sa company like para sa uban, majority na mo ang area sa mi ka-operate pero dili man pud mi diha exclusive. Napud mi mga initiatives sa kumpanya in partnership sa Ecosytem Foundation. Dili lang dito sa mga area siguro tanan dool sa Kitanglad ug sa uban nga kuan kay like sa South Sky nami dito nga portion sa Baramag, Dagkagan, nagi po yung mga ingana nga program. Mao to gina-consider po dato nga bisag sa ingani nga pamaagi, makonsider gyapon siya sa payment for environmental services. Dili lang siguro kamo ang partner. Ikaduha abot atong sa payment nga 1,000 sa saging, 500 sa pinya. Unsa ba to siya? Cash or in kind? Kay para makabalo pud sa side sa kumpanya unsa ang paging partner dito. In kind. O mo to kay mong cash.
It is cash.
Cash.
Yeah,
Cash.
Kung nga unsa siya pang-account. Para sa side sa kumpanya di mo punta basta sa lang
Nine fund manager. I think it's Savior Science Foundation's the fund manager.
No, in the case of Unifruti and 7 tribes, we have this BPAC, the Bukidnon Indigenous Peoples Advisory Council, which has an administrative staff, which prepares the plan how this money is being disbursed and makes a report to the constituency, the 7 tribes, yearly. When they meet together during this occasion, there are more than 3,000 of them. So this is reported, but I must admit to you na may mga refinements na kailangan. Like for example, itong mga project nila like Lutya, every 7 tribes are given sufficient money to propagate Lutya, and it's very difficult to monitor millions of Lutya being planted. But the reason behind is that after the drought in 2006, we believe that Lutya, after the dry season, could grow or rejuvenate when the rain comes. So other than that, there are also expenses like training, assemblies, which may mga question ang accountant namin. But I think this is what we call the growing pains. No? Talagang we try to improve over time. Then second, I like because I've heard a lot about Kasilak, you said. And the fact that, you know, just like the PGA operating in areas even outside of their area of operation is very commendable because it only tells us na you look at the environment as a whole, not just simply on the area where you operate. And we thank you for that and we appreciate that.
Mo lang to kay basic sa uban nga mga area na mo ba nga like dili man may maka-focus din nga area katong ipang-mention nimo ang among initiative siguro katong in partnership lang pud kung asa biga operate pwede ba to siya nato ma-consider pud sa company nga payment for environmental services na to kung pwede ba to yung ato.
To add, with regards to EWWP, we could not get out of our area of operation because those are dictated in the terms of reference with the fund provider. So we cannot get out of that kasi they are closely monitored. But in the case of the companies like Unifruti, you know, it has all the freedom to choose its area where it can implement projects similar to this. In fact, most of the projects of Unifruti right now is found in southern Mindanao in conflict-affected areas where others are afraid to dare.
So sa among layo or gawa sa area sa Savior Science unsaon ba namo siya nga pamaagi nga murag makuan siya nga dili man area sa Savior Science University ang uban namong area of operation unsaon man namo na nga
Pero take note that Savior Science Foundation has developed the experience and expertise to manage fund. In that case, for example, if there are PES transactions that would need PES fund manager, wala namang ibang fund manager that I know of at the moment na may experience except Savior Science Foundation. So be it in Luzon, baka gusto nyo, pwede doon.
what I mean sir like for example naman may area dito sa Maramag, Don Carlos kung namin ma-partner dito nga community or mga IP dito kinahanglan pa ba mo tap sa Savior Science para i-agi ang fund or i-direct na sa
Yeah, you can create your own.
Not necessarily. I think what is presented now is a model which you can do in any other areas. Okay. Siguro, on the last part, you will have the planning. We can talk about what kind of partnership and collaboration that we can do. Yes.
Probably just to add, no, because the companies represented here also do CSR. Like for us in Del Monte Philippines, through the Del Monte Foundation, we also do our own environmental conservation initiatives. Like for example, growing 20,000 trees every year, no, annually. But on top of that, our company, through the foundation again, also does pay PES, no, through the Xavier Science Foundation for the reforestation of Mount Calatuman. But while it was discussed earlier that it's usually in the form of cash, our contribution